Tell us more.
Okay, one quick thing before I go any further about what I have said about the innovations with the internet and publication. I found that out through my wife, and I would like to thank her for it, because without her, I would not have known that all of these things are going on. Because I'm a little bit older than she is, and she's a little bit more internet savvy than I am. You know?
Point taken.
So, but to move on then, what I thought I'd do is today I actually brought two books. One is called Creating Poetry, which is a really good book for beginners of any kind. And the other is called The Making of a Poem by Mark Strand and Even Boland, an anthology of poetic forms. The anthology of poetic forms covers all the forms in depth in terms of constructing anything from a pantun to a sestina to a sonnet, and using free verse as well. This book is just a general introduction. It covers every general aspect of poetry. And it's a great little book. It's got exercises in it and everything else. And it goes through it talks about sound, it talks about imagery, it talks about all the basic things one really needs to think about when writing a poem.
So, the question that I had was, how many forms of poetry are you aware of? Because at one point I think that they said that there were like 26 different forms of poetry.
Oh goodness, I would say at the very least 26. I can't even name them all. As a matter of fact, I just learned of a different form last night, once again from my wife, called erasure poetry, which is a new form of poetry itself. So the number of forms are creating, or the number of forms that exist, is growing every day. Now, in terms of traditional poetry, the list is fairly long. I would say at least 26, and there might be more that I don't even know of, because sometimes what we do in English is we incorporate forms that were once used in a different language. As a matter of fact, we stole the sonnet from the French and the Italians. It's not naturally an English form, and it comes from the word that means, I can't pronounce it correctly, so you'll have to forgive me. The Italian word, I believe, is sogno or sono, and it means little song. And that's where we get the sonnet from. We introduced it into English, we took it from the French, and of course we've been innovative with it. The same thing with the villanelle. The villanelle was originally a French form used for light-hearted verse, but we have great poets like Dylan Thomas, who wrote Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night, who has changed the way that we look at the form of the villanelle. Other authors who have used it, of course, Elizabeth Bishop's One Art is a really good villanelle. Theodore Roethke's The Waking is another good one. And then there's one by William Epson whose name slips me at the moment. Okay. And in terms of sonnets, sonnets have been used since at least the 13th century, if not before, and they became very famous with the Italian poet Petrarch. And we've been using them ever since. And almost every poet who has ever written has at least played around with the idea of the sonnet, and has at least written a sonnet.
Okay. And so you're saying the sonnet is probably the most popular form that a poet or a poem takes on?
It is one of the most popular forms of traditional English poetry when we talk about formal verse.
Okay. What about haiku?
A haiku, that's a Japanese form. We have incorporated that into English, and that's syllabic verse, all right, where you just have 5 syllables in the first line, 5 or 7 syllables in the second, and then 5 in the third. And what you do with a haiku is you basically try to create a striking image, and then a contrast to that image that adds to the image previously. The imagery previously used. Okay. A sonnet, on the other hand, does pay attention to syllabics, but it also pays attention to accent.
Okay. When you say accent, you mean whether it's an English person speaking, or you mean like in punctuation?
stressed and unstressed syllables. Like when you open a dictionary and you look at the pronunciation of the word, it little has, oftentimes when you look at the pronunciation of a word, it's got little marks at the top of it. And that tells you whether or not that accent is stressed that syllable is stressed or not.
So do you take into account dialect? Like you said you're from Chicago. Chicagoans or Midwesterners speak differently than Southerners.
That is a really good point. And one of the interesting things about it is kind of being in the middle, because nowadays when I go to Chicago, people ask me where I'm from. When I am here, people ask me where I'm from. So I'm kind of lost.
I'm sorry?
She's not going to let me get away without speaking. I just can't